Hello and welcome to Theology Unleashed. I'm Arjuna, and this is the channel where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. Today, I've got a guest I found in the comment section under the debate between James Tour and Professor David Farina, and we will be analyzing the debate. I wanted to invite him on because I was reading his comments, and it sounds like he was pretty clued into the history of the debate and some of the surrounding issues. He's a Christian, or maybe you can just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Michael Shipman. I live in San Antonio, Texas. I am, in fact, a Christian. I'm attempting to be a super Jesus freak, like Dave Tour is, but I have not achieved his level yet, though I respect the man. And so I work in the areas of law and finance. I have a military background for a few years. And then I spent an awful lot of time and then eventually retired as a federal intelligence agent where I investigated national security crimes. So there's actually a reason that I'm kind of throwing that out there so that I'm establishing some bona fides in regards to my ability to apply reason and inference and logic to certain situations when we may not understand the totality of the situation. And I think the debate that went on with that's been going on for a few years now with Farina and Tour kind of matches that.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds interesting. I remember hearing Casey Luskin talking on Discovery Institute content, and he's got a law background. And I was thinking, oh yeah, his law background is actually kind of relevant here. There was one talk where they're saying like, he was using definitions of terms to say like, okay, or even if you want to say intelligent design isn't science, fine, but is it true? let's not have the semantic discussion and just move on to something else. And I thought that was interesting. So yeah, we're both, you could say, laymen. Neither of us are biochemists or origin of life researchers. So if that's what you're hoping to hear in a debate review, you might just want to go find another video. But we both find this subject interesting. We've thought about it a lot, and we think we can add some comments to the discussion. So let's get right into it. What did you want to start with?
Well, I would like to kind of buttress up against what you just said as a lead-in, which is it seems like in our modern culture that there seems to be a tremendous amount of conflict going on between science and theology. And I think that most people that are on the theological side of that divide, if you will, do not see that conflict. We see science is a way of understanding how God does what God does. But yet, I get the impression, and today's discussion about the debate with Dave Farina, I think, will be a part of that, is that those who are atheistic or of that bent think that science is continually finding ways that disprove God. And while I don't think that's the case, I do believe that it's the case that they are trying to manipulate science an awful lot in how it's broadcast to us, those who don't know how to do the chemistry on the board or don't know how to do complex mathematical equations and don't remember, don't remember advanced mathematics from high school, maybe because we've moved on from it, that there's still a lot of truth out there. And, in the prep for what we were talking about, Arjuna, you made a good comment in regards to trying to break down some of what gets thrown up as an argument. And this is an opportunity, I think, for people who can't do the chemistry to maybe discover a way of ferreting out the truth of a situation when it's obscenely complex and we don't have the educational background or the experience in order to understand that. So if we don't have that, how can we still find the truth?
Oh yeah, and I wanted to add something to that. This whole idea that you have to be an expert in order to have, decide on an issue, I think is not right because, some aspects of the debate, like, in a particular scientific paper, is this a functional cell or not, or technicals of the paper, is this collection of amino acids able to reproduce itself? I don't know. I can't read the paper and look at that, but if two scientists can say, Oh, it's only reproducing 90% of itself. Well, I can say, well, in a couple of generations, that's not going to be much, is it? Or I was having one debate in a comment section with another YouTuber who did a reply to the Farina debate in favor of Farina. And he was saying, it's on tour to prove that 10 amino acids is insufficient to get life started. It's like, no, we don't see 10 amino acids. We don't know of any life existing with 10 amino acids. So if you want to say 10 amino acids is enough to get life started, that's your burden of proof to demonstrate that that's enough. It's not like, oh, well, you were trying to say we should show 20 amino acids. We've shown we can get 10. It's on you to show that 10 isn't enough. It's like, these are the sorts of things that us as laymen can decide on, because it's really just simple logic.
Yes, I agree with that. So if we can, do we need to lay out a little bit of how we got to this point where we're talking about our impressions of a debate that just happened, over the last 2 years in making?
I guess we could set a little background. We're just going to keep it brief because I imagine a lot of people watching are familiar with it.
Okay, good. Well, if they're pretty familiar with it, then I'm going to make the assumption that they did. But we are talking about a gentleman by the name of Dave Farina, and he has a YouTube channel called Professor Dave Explains, and he's got a tremendous amount of content on there across a very wide spectrum of information. And he does have a bit of a science background. And then the second player in our drama, if you will, is Dr. James Torr, who is a synthetic organic chemist. And he also has a YouTube channel, but he made his bones in synthetic organic chemistry. He's both a professor that teaches at Rice University, as well as, I can't go his whole biography, but he's got many, many patents. And I think by any reasonable standard, he's in the top 3% of all scientists worldwide. So while he does not work in the origin of life field, he does work in the field, if you will, that you would most likely be in if you were to be an origin of life researcher. And as a result of that, he says, and I have no reason to doubt him, he's uniquely qualified to be able to actually read and understand the research that's out there that is advocating that we are just this club, somewhere in here to being able to understand how we had an origin of life from inert chemicals to the creation of first life. So that's where we're at. And let's see, I would mention that there is one additional piece that needs to be mentioned. In the debate itself, we had Dr. Wayne Guida, who is unaffiliated with both sides of the party, who is also an organic chemist that neither one of them knew. And he flew in to do the moderating, for what it's worth. If you watch the video, maybe the big loser of the night was Dr. Guida, but it was kind of a tough situation to try to moderate.
Yeah, I think moderating, I've hosted a few debates, and moderating debates can be tough. I think there's a bit to it, cutting people off, and probably more should have been done to calm down the parties from cutting each other off and yelling over the top. It's a whole special skill on its own.
I think the big issue is that there is an awful lot of science that comes out, and we are hearing it from certain experts. And if we don't understand it, we have to rely on authority. They're making an argument from authority, and we've got nothing to combat it. So we kind of have to go with that. In some cases, you may have an opposing opinion, and that's all well and good. But oftentimes, it seems like everything in modernity is black and white. So there is not really two sides. There's only the correct side and then the wrong people. And as a result of that, whoever the out group is, the wrong people, if you will, whoever gets labeled as that, their voices are not heard. And so from a science perspective, I think that you can make an argument that a lot of information that was put out about a recent worldwide pandemic was given to us in a certain way, that it may later turned out to be not what was originally presented to us. We also know that back when I was in the 1970s, I was a young man at the time, or I was an older child. And of course, we had global cooling. Global cooling was going to take over the entire world. And then, a couple of decades later, that switched over to global warming and everything is going to be melting. And then when the science didn't pan out on that, I think they said, in fact, 10 years ago, we were supposed to have lost like 60% of all of our beaches by now because of the rise in seawater. And of course, that was supposed to happen this year, and that hasn't happened. So now we've transitioned to climate change, and okay, that's all well and good. So that's just, of course, we've always had climate change.
Anything the weather does, you blame it on carbon.
Yeah,
you just spin the wheel, and wherever it lands, no matter what the weather is doing, it's just carbon.
Yeah, and the ozone layer, well, we were hearing about that all the time, and I haven't heard about ozone layer.
I think they actually fixed that one. I think they figured out a particular chemical that was damaging the ozone layer, and they restricted the release of that one. But that's what I've heard anyway.
Well, you raise a good point, which again, I'm also not a climate scientist. Okay, so just bear that in mind. But there was chlorofluorocarbons, right? And a lot of that was in air conditioning systems. And we've spent many billions and billions and billions of dollars getting rid of that stuff. I don't know. Did the earth kind of just heal itself, or holy mackerel, by using a different chemical to run our AC, did we actually fix the ozone layer? But my point on that is, it's not touted as we did this. It's just out of the news now. So it just kind of moved on. And then the last thing I'll mention is, we have this a lot in America. I don't know about where you're at, but there's a lot of controversy now, scientific controversy, no doubt, about what is a woman. So I'm not going to get into any of those issues, okay, other than just to identify them, to say that there is a correct side and then there is the wrong side, okay? And the wrong side is being pressed down very hard. So it winds up to be that we've got these two guys, and James Tour kind of on his own, he didn't know Dave Farina, wrote about something about origin of life and how you're kind of being lied to. And so the papers are not really what the papers are saying they are. And so also the scientific media is putting out information that is even more convoluted than what the scientists are telling them that it is. And Dr. Tour had a great point in one of his videos where he said something like, when they did a big survey of a lot of folks, the vast majority of which they selected to be college educated, 2-year, 4-year masters, that kind of thing, and asked them simply, hey, have we created life in the lab? And something like 70% of people thought that we've actually created life in the lab. And that's a crock. It's a total unadulterated crock. So There were 30% of college educated people that thought we'd made a frog. Okay. I mean, it's just craziness. And what is the purpose for putting that information out there? I've got to say, when somebody's lying to you, there's got to be a reason. And I'm not sure what that is. Maybe we'll have that discussion today about what that reason might be.
Yeah, well, on that subject, I find it really interesting. There's sort of there's a case where the atheists here want to have their cake and eat it too, because when the theist is arguing intelligent design types of things, we have no idea about abiogenesis, the limitations of the mutation selection mechanism cannot explain the diversity of life, and so on. Then they're like, oh yeah, that's just a God of the gaps fallacy. The truth, all of this could be true about us not knowing any of these things, and it still doesn't mean God did it. And it's like, well, that might be, but then why are you so bent out of shape to debunk all these arguments if they actually have no truth bearing on theism?
It's interesting because that is one of the, if I had to pick the most stated critique against Dr. Tour, who is a super Jesus guy, okay? He's also a super scientist guy, but he's also a super Jesus guy. And I hear that so much in regards to, he's a Jesus guy and a God guy, and because of that, he relies on the God of the gaps argument. And I will tell you that in watching more hours than I'd care to admit of his videos, the guy just does not use any type of argument from a theological perspective when he does his critiques of abiogenesis and the chemicals and the chemistry that goes along, as a support mechanism. It never, ever happens. However, on just about every person that critiques him, especially, an atheistic critiquer, not only do they level that, but they do the same thing. We could call it science of the gaps. Hey, we don't know it yet, okay, but we know there's going to be a scientific explanation for this eventually, okay? And I kind of, because I believe in God, I'm a theist, okay? I follow Jesus. I have no reason to expect that we won't find out those types of answers. In my theology, we are created in the image of God. And so we have those characteristics. And one of the things God apparently likes to do is create things. So I'm of a belief that we like to create things too. That's where we kind of get it. So will we be able to take a lump of dirt, and turn it into something? That doesn't damage my theology in the slightest. But they always seem to be bringing up this science of the gaps. We're going to get it. Well, good on you, buddy. I can't wait to see your papers. Okay. Your research papers. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I actually watched a debate review with Farina, and I call it the classic thing that it's called is a just so story. So it's like basically when Richard Dawkins or David Farina or anyone, they've like got this clue over here and this clue over here, and they're like, we don't really know how these two things connect, but it must have happened. It's a just so story. Like it was a classic one of Dawkins saying how the squirrels that can fly, that have web feet and they can glide, how that came about. It's like, well, some squirrels would fall over and the ones that didn't have the webbing would smash their head and die. And so the ones that had a little bit of webbing had a survival advantage, and this was selected for the genetics of the squirrels that had more and more webbing until eventually we had gliding squirrels. It's like, it's kind of an implausible story, or maybe if you depending on your background beliefs, it's more plausible. But it's just a story somebody's made up to fit with their belief, like almost like dark matter, right? Like we've got all these equations and our equations don't work, so we just put in this fudge factor called dark matter and it all works. And it's like, do they really have any idea what they're talking about, or have they just found a hole in their theory and plugged it with something that they've given a scientific sounding name to?
Well, even Einstein, when he was working his theory of, I think it was special relativity, he put the fudge factor in there too, because it didn't his math wasn't making sense. And then when he got called on it, to his everlasting credit, okay, the guy says, okay, I was wrong about that. Let's fix it. Okay, let's go with what the math actually says. And he says to his everlasting shame, that he used that fudge factor. But I say to his everlasting, people try to do what they can do based on what they know and what they're doing at the time. But to his everlasting credit, he said, hey, I made a mistake. So let's fix it and let's move on. So credit to him.
I've got this clip. Maybe we should play this clip where we show him doing his just so story.
Sure.
Future Arjuna here, just doing the editing, and thought I'd offer some clarification. So the clip that you're about to see is David Farina laying out the basic format of his argument for abiogenesis. That's then followed by a clip where he, on the same podcast, sort of agrees with the just so story laid out by the YouTuber who's interviewing him. The channel is Bridge the Divide, and the fellow's name is JL.
But it depends on what the goal is, right? Because the problem is this: there's too many people, and James likes to throw this straw man out there as like that we can build a cell, that we can synthesize a cell in the lab as being the point where we understand or abiogenesis. It's not. That's synthetic biology. There's overlap with origin of life research, but that's not what the field is trying to do. The field is trying to figure out how life came about prebiotically, not what can we do in the lab, right? It's because it's not a bunch of molecules floating together and then boom, and if we can figure out which molecules how, right? That's not how it happened, right? So that's why one of my prompts had to be systems chemistry, and talking about how you have these autocatalytic sets, you have these molecules, you have ribozymes and you have peptides, and the coevolution happening with these systems of molecules that over millions of years produce the first protocell.
Oh, just while editing, I wanted to point out a quick comment on the point Farina is making there, which is that this idea that we don't need to look at the cell or any of the organic chemistry involved in order to do abiogenesis, all we have to do is look at the molecular systems chemistry that he wants to talk about. One issue with that argument is it means the causal powers of this chemistry he wants to look at are considered without any regard to the complexity of the thing they're being asked to produce. So usually when you're looking at the causal powers that a thing possesses, the effects that it could bring about, you also want to think about the effect and how complex that is. So we would think that the cell becoming more complex, the simplest example of a living organism that we can find, if that increases in complexity, that should raise questions about the cause that brought that about. So if we have a scientific endeavor which is seeking to give an explanation for an effect without taking any of the details of the complexity of that effect into account, then I'm not really sure how we could call that science. I think just sounds like a just so story to me.
Fully self-replicating molecules that evolve by natural selection, that's very, very pertinent to the origin of life, right? We have Darwinian behavior on the molecular level prior to the existence of a living cell. This has profound impact on the field and on philosophy even, right? This is an incredible breakthrough. And so obviously no one has watched autocatalytic sets become a living cell. It's not like we've seen that. So we're not totally, we got it. And in fact, there are other competing models that don't rely strictly on ribozymes and peptides co-evolving to produce life. There's definitely way more to talk about, other models and others. We have a lot to figure out.
I've always seen OOL research is very much like a giant jigsaw puzzle, of which we have large sections filled up, but we are still missing some sections. But we see enough of the image. We can be we have here and here and here and here, but we can tell it's a fucking elephant. We can see what's coming into shape here. So
got a missing ear.
Right.
Yeah, so that basically the YouTuber there, sorry I haven't remembered his name, basically just fully spelled out we have a bit here and a bit here. We have no clue about anything in the middle, so we're just going to assume that it matches our theory. That's their naturalism of the gaps, right out in broad daylight. So they're completely trying to have their cake and eat it too and accuse the theists of one logical fallacy while doing exactly the same thing in perhaps a more egregious way themselves, or at least the same level of logical fallacy.
Yeah, I do agree with Dave, in regards to the point that a lot of what's being done, and in fact, what Tor is talking about himself, is before you get to a cell. But I mean, I think that it's not unfair in the slightest to acknowledge that, and I'm going to go out on my scientific limb here, so I hope I don't cut myself off, but I'm unaware of any life that exists without a cell. So we got to get to a cell. We don't get the vision, we don't get the vision of a life. We don't have a life form until we get a cell, So it's good that we're doing all this stuff beforehand, but we've got to kind of know a little bit about where we're going. And I don't think that we can just skip the cell and the cell will be made in the back. As you know, there's a guy named Michael Behe that talks about irreducible complexity. I don't think that we get to life and then we back up and we get cells to make our life that we had, more efficient going forward. Again, not a scientist, so I could be wrong on that. I would like to take a moment because I think I think that in that clip that we saw maybe one of the most linchpin issues come up. And it was, of course, lobbed as an insult, but nonetheless, I think it's one of the most linchpin issues in this whole debate. So regardless of how we got to the prompt for the debate, which is about whether or not we're clueless about origins of life, clueless comes up a lot. And in fact, there are some very good reviews of this debate. Let's see, Dr. Paul Rimmer did a great review. He's a scientist himself, an astrochemist at Cambridge University, and he was doing a debate review of Capturing Christianity. And he did a great review of the science. So if you want the science, that's a great place to go for it. Not that you're going to understand it, but he walks you through it. So you got a really good sense, a good flavor of it. But even he said, hey, we're not clueless. Well, I think that it is important to have some kind of a working definition for us for clueless. And I think that everybody's making, I think that Dr. Tour was using it slightly hyperbolically, not literally, but slightly hyperbolically. And so I guess my question or my issue is, how are we going to define clueless? And it doesn't mean that we don't have any clues. It just means that we don't know. I mean, the clues are so ephemeral. They're so poorly defined. We're so early in the process that we really don't know where we're going. And so I'll give you an analogy for that. If we went back to the early 18th century and we created the steam engine, okay, now we got a steam engine. So we've got propulsion, an automatic type of propulsion, and at the same time, the astronomer who was the buddy of the guy who made the steam engine, he goes, you know what? I wonder if we can one day go to the moon. I wonder if we're clueless about that. And he goes, well, I'm not clueless about it because here we've got a steam engine, and the steam engine is going to give us locomotion. And he's right. We're not clueless about it. We got a steam engine, and it gives us powered locomotion going forward. So maybe we could get stuff moving up towards the moon. We can go visit the moon. Are they clueless? No, they're not clueless. But nothing of what they know is going to get them anywhere where they want to be. And I think that that's not what Dr. Tour is trying to say. He's saying, listen, you're clueless hyperbolically because you don't know where you're at. You don't know where you're going. You haven't identified how you need to get from point A to point B, and you don't have any valid hypotheses. Sure, in these little areas, like in a polypeptide or something, you're trying to create this, the Miller-Urey experiment, whatever. You got some ideas, you're poking around, but you're poking around with a blindfold in the middle, in a dark, in an enclosed room. And you're just trying to find things and maybe help you refine your hypothesis. So I think it is fair for us to understand that if we're going to judge Tour on winning the debate based on the term clueless, well, he probably fails. Okay. But by the same token, I think that Dave Farina didn't give us anything that we could latch on that made us feel like we had any kind of a realistic clue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's good. I would like to think of an analogy of a crime investigation, and you have someone who you think committed the crime, but they have a really good alibi. It's like, well, how could they have committed murder? Because they were on stage in front of thousands of people when it happened. And that you could have evidence that they committed the murder and evidence that they didn't, in which case you could say you have some clues, but then the clues are contradicted by other things, so you're confused. Or another analogy I thought of is if someone wanted to claim this 4-year-old boy built a house, and as evidence from building a house, let me show you him hammering a few pieces of wood together. It's like, just because he can hammer a few pieces of wood together doesn't mean he can do it with big pieces of wood and put them together with nice measurements and get it all precise. So I think that's something like analogous to this evidence. It's like, well, we're not clueless about origin of life. We can get half the amino acids, and it's like, yeah, but just like the 4-year-old's got physical limitations and intelligence limitations, that what we're able to produce with these natural processes is miles away from what it needs to be, and there's huge steps that we have no clue about.
It's been my experience that your physical ability, that is what it is, right? But your intellect is all well and good, and I really don't care how much you actually know. Somebody who's got experience doing it, okay, that's an entirely different situation. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you haven't actually done it, I guarantee you're going to jack it up first. You can watch all the YouTube videos on how do I put molding in my house, and I guarantee to you, the first time you get in there and whip out a miter saw, you're going to screw up all the angles. Okay, but after you've done it a few times, even if you didn't watch the YouTube videos to get all the information, you're going to be far ahead. So it can't just be knowledge; it's got to be knowledge and experience to get us to go forward.
So I think just quickly on what it sounds like Farina's argument there is, so Tour wants to do organic chemistry, which is like basically what life looks like. Life is doing organic or synthetic chemistry, and that's the area where James Tour is expert. And Farina wants to look at systems chemistry, which I know next to nothing about, but my understanding is it's something to do with having autocatalytic collection of molecules which can reproduce themselves and somehow evolve. And maybe, I do not know if it's the case that we've actually ever seen these autocatalytic molecule or whatever's whatever they are, reproduce themselves 100%. There was one part of the debate where James is saying, no, it's never been. They've reproduced 10% of themselves, and there's just basically like a yes, it is, no, it's not, back and forth, rather than actually opening up any of the scientific papers and looking at what they said, which is a bit disappointing. But it just sounds like from there, that's where his just so story gets started. It's like, well, we've seen a few molecules can do this autocatalytic thing, they can reproduce, therefore give them billions of years, and voila. Which
actually, Dr. Tour kind of addressed a little bit of that, he's addressed a lot of that, I think. But there's a great clip if you want to pull up the Steve Benner part 1.
Here, do you lead in?
Okay, yeah. So earlier we've been talking about ribose a lot and things of that nature, and systems chemistry. And so I think one of the issues that Dave Tour is pushing back against is the fact that the scientists will come out and say, hurrah, I've made this, okay? And in fact, they may have. And there was a big discussion actually in the internal part of the debate about, like, I made something. And Tour is saying, oh, wait a second. A, either you haven't made it, or B, if you have made it, you haven't made it work the right way. And even if you happen to find something in there that is the right thing, you're making so much junk in the process of it that junk is going to make everything else decay, and you're not going to get anything. It's not going to work. And so there was that big discussion about, like, hey, we made ribose. And in this little clip, Dr. Tour is talking about how Steve Benner made ribose in the lab, okay, by putting a bunch of stuff together, doing his laboratory stuff, doing whatever it is he did. And out of this big old experiment, he has ribose. So I thought this was kind of funny.
Calm down. I know it's funny. I'm laughing with you.
¿Cuál es el trabajo más duro que has hecho?
Y me llama el cocinero. Risita, ve por la paellera. Venga, que las 2 de la tarde ya están aquí. Miren, bañador, en las chanclas. Todo despeinado porque no me dio tiempo nada ponerme las chanclas y el bañador. Voy a la playa, había subido la marea. Eso. Eso. Había subido la marea y encontré una paella. Y la encontré porque estaba la paellera agarrada entre las piedras de Chipiona, del faro. Y cuando entro en el restaurante me ve el cocinero con una paellera y adentro la vende paellera. ¡Asómate! ¡Mira dónde llega el agua! Llegaba el agua hasta el restaurante. Había subido la marea. ¡Eso! ¡Hay que hacerlo ahora! Con los 2 sacos de arroz. ¡Ay, llama para Sevilla! ¡Llama a Sevilla que traigo
I mean, most people would hide this in the supplemental.
So that little skit was, a Tour imagining what an intern would have been experiencing had he been working, in Steve Benner's lab, when he says, "Hey, we've created a ribose." So there is a ribose. They showed it on the spectrum, but then, and I mean, even Benner, I believe, makes it very clear in his paper that he was writing on that. And I don't know this because I read the paper. I've touched on the papers, but Tour will lead you through them. He goes to an outside chemistry lab that creates all of this, and then it gives him all this pure ribose, which he brings back into the lab to start the next step. Okay, so did he create ribose in a lab? Was Dave right that there was a ribose created? Sure, but it was created in such a way that, is that all you're after, is to prove that you can create a ribose in a prebiotic, way in a prebiotic system? Okay, fine. So you did it, but then as soon as you've done it, it gets destroyed by everything else that's around it, and it's totally unusable.
Yeah, right. And another point is that, like when we talked about already, how they just have one step over here, and narrow. And in the debate, James Stewart said, "Look, I'm going to grant you all these things, and we're just going to focus on this. And there's a funny clip I want to play where Dave Farina actually uses the word magical to describe what all the things that Tua has granted him. It's like, if they're magical, it's because it's a stain on your theory, not for not James Tua's one. Here it is.
It have
You're
enzymes.
talking about peptides.
You don't
You're
have
just
enzymes.
lying about what I
That's
said.
why I put polysaccharide number 3 to show that you couldn't make enzymes.
You're wrong, and we do have enzymes. But if you'll grant me the enzymes anyway in this magical world that you've invented,
It's like, I don't know if he understands what he just said, but it's like, there's so many things, like the person defending the position, Farina, is in the difficult position because anytime you're defending a view, anyone can just throw up a bunch of BS and you have to respond to it, right? So James Tua is saying, let's just narrow in on this. I'm going to grant you all these things. And then Dave Farina uses the word magical to describe the concessions that were granted to him to get his worldview off the ground.
Yeah, I will say, okay, that there were probably two things that, one thing that Dr. Tua did that I'm sure he regrets having done, which was losing his cool. We can talk about that more later on. But one of the things that he did, and I think it was a little bit of sneaky, okay, and I think it was intentional. But by listening, he totally reframed the entire debate to set the preconditions of what we would have to have accomplished in order to not be clueless. And in fairness, writing those 5 things on the blackboard, I think that kind of threw Dave for a loop, and made him feel like he was at a disadvantage. And so as a result of that, I think that was kind of a sneaky trick for Dr. Tua to do to give himself a leg up on the debate. But it was his first debate; he might not have known otherwise. And then, kind of related to that is on his first 2 prompts, Dr. Tua went up and spent time writing on the board and says, here's the chemistry. You got this molecule, you got this. And he goes, Professor Dave, walk up to me and connect these 2 for me. And I think that was, it could have been done, I believe, but it would have been very difficult for Professor Dave to get up there and to actually have shown the chemistry. But it did establish a certain level of bona fides for Dr. Tua that then Dave, just left down there unchallenged by not being able to walk up to the board and do any chemistry.
Yeah. I mean, I can see why he did it. It's a good trick. And well, that's what he teaches chemistry. That's what you do. You write chemistry on the board. And if one of your students wants to disagree with you, then it's like, well, here's the chemistry I've written out on the board. You can come and write on the board and show me what you're trying to say, and we'll see if it stands up or not. And that's what you do in a chemistry class. I think this, you got to switch gears a little bit for this debate. And what would have been more appropriate would have been to just say, well, here's the problem. Do any of your papers address that? And the back and forth on the papers was really disappointing because it's like, oh no, you're talking about a different paper. In this paper, he said functional. And there was one point where the back and forth was Tua was saying, he uses basically what it sounded like to me. The argument from James Tua is he's using the word functional, but what does he mean by functional? Let's go into that. Does he mean the same thing by the word functional as we mean by the word functional when we're talking about whether this is actually a kind of life form that could get off the ground or not? And I think a lot of Dave Farina things is there was a funny meme put out by Cameron Bertuzzi, which was, James Tua, come and write the chemistry on the board, show it to me. And David's like, I don't need to write on the board. Look at the title of the paper. And it's like, James Tua can disagree with the title of the paper without calling the author of the paper a liar. It's like, you sensationalize something, you give it a title, and you use a term in a particular technical way. And then in your paper, you describe what you mean by the term. So James can be saying he didn't have functional, whatever it was. Even though he's using the word functional, we just have to look at what he means by the word. I'm using the word differently. I'm not calling him a liar. I'm just being more precise and using the word in a different way. And David's just hung up on what the words mean. It's like, look, the word functional is on the paper. They said they got something functional. It's like, yes, but is that relevant for life?
Yeah, I think that's I've done a lot of reading of reviews, and Reddit has a lot of strings, addressing this. And on Reddit, actually, there's a ton of there are an awful lot of people who believe in atheistic abiogenesis that are on the Reddit lines, okay, and back and forth. And before I finish that, I'm just speaking for me here, but I'm also extrapolating, I think, reasonably. Look at I'm going as low as I can and still be in the screen with my hand. This is my level of knowledge about organic chemistry right down here. Okay, like so low you can barely even see it. And then we've got guys that have taken classes and things maybe here. Listen, I think Dave is right here. I think Dave understands an awful lot about this chemistry. Okay, you with me? Mm-hmm. Now, what that means to me is he can read he can read an abstract and probably have a pretty good idea about what it's saying. I can read an abstract and get a gist maybe, and then he can go into it a little bit deeper, and he probably understands a lot of what he's reading inside the actual research paper itself. Whereas I've tried, these things get referenced all the time. I've tried. I can within a paragraph or two, I'm done. I could be reading Chinese for all I know. Okay, so I just can't follow along with it. But here's our different levels of expertise. So I'm not saying that I know anything near like what Dave knows. But here's the deal for Tor. There's no doubt that Tor is one of these guys that's off the top 3% in his field of all scientists on the face of the planet today. And so he certainly knows far, far more than Dave. And that puts us in a position really where just because Dave might not understand as much as Tor, that doesn't mean that Dave doesn't have something valuable to add to this conversation. We are in a position, or I'm in a position, because I know so little, that I really do have a battle of experts going on. And Dave just has to do a much better job in his expertise than he has been doing. Even the people that are on his side are calling him out on it like it's crazy. I mean, it's like, hey, I wish this guy wasn't on our side. I know he agrees with us. He's putting out information, in support of our position, but he's just the worst communicator about it. And he's ticking everybody off, and he's confusing the situation so much that it makes us all look like a bunch of idiots. So unless you're a sycophant, okay, for Professor Dave Explains, and God knows he's got a lot of those, okay, but just Dave is not making any headway in educating me, okay, as a backwaters Christian, who believes in the spaghetti monster. He's not getting me away from that because of the way that he acts, and he's not, gaining middle people who might be persuadable just because of the way he presents the information, or by the personality that he uses when he presents it that way. You can't just reference papers and say the papers show you the science. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Like I said before, it's really disappointing the lack of actually getting into the science. Like there was one back and forth, which was like, solid argumentation of like, here, you can't get the amino acids because you need the side chains. And Farina's like, oh, we can get the side chains that's in this paper. And Tua's like, no, you can't for this reason. And it's a bit of back and forth. And the one YouTuber who video I watched, he actually asked a question live during the debate where there was the thing about like, well, 10 amino acids is enough, isn't it? It's like, so what would it be more interesting if it's like, okay, yeah, we can get the amino acids that don't have the side chain thing, but there's 10 amino acids that don't have side chains, so we can get half the amino acids. What more do you expect? We don't know everything about origin of life. We know how 10 amino acids could have formed in prebiotic conditions. Surely that's enough to get life started. And James Tour could have said, well, show me what you can do with 10 amino acids that could bring life about. Have you got a paper for that? And David could have said, oh yeah, here's the paper for that. Or he could have said, no, we don't have a paper for that, but here's why we don't need to. Here's all the other. And they could have actually had a scientific discussion, but instead it was, like you said from Dave, it was a lot of ad hominem. And you hear him and people on his side saying it's not ad hominem. James Tour is a liar, and calling someone a liar is an ad hominem. It's just honest. Once William Lane Craig was asked like, oh, we heard you when questions say some criticisms of Christopher Hitchens. Isn't that ad hominem? It's like, no, it's not ad hominem. It's just the real William Lane Craig. That's what I think of him. It would be ad hominem if I said because of these character traits he's got, his views are wrong. when I'm responding to the arguments he gives, I respond to the arguments. I was just asked my opinion on him as a person, and I gave my opinion. So that's different. But in a debate, like, he actually said, like, my goal with the debate was just to expose James Tour for being a liar, because the science thing we can show that's been done. I just wanted to expose James Tour's lies. It's like, well, that's ad hominem. He used the word discredit. I wanted to discredit him. That's ad hominem. So, but, maybe there's some relevance for winning points for your side if it's like, well, people listen to James Tour because he's got credibility and they trust what he says. So if we can discredit him, then we can show that what he says can't be trusted. It's like, well, that's all about the authority of the person. So that's 100% ad hominem. To make it not ad hominem, be like, I don't care who said it. It doesn't matter. Some hobo could have walked off the street and said this. Let's see if the argument stacks up or not. And let's just look at the arguments. And I think that's what most people wanted to see, except for some people on both sides, of course, want to see either side insulted and look stupid. But I think the vast majority of people just want to figure out what's true and see the actual issues discussed in depth.
Honestly, I was so much looking forward to this debate, which I never thought would happen, but I was so much looking forward to it. And the reason I was looking forward to it is, even though I knew Dave's character and I know how he acts, I was okay. So we're going to bring the best arguments we got. He's going to show us exactly where this disagreement is that he's got with Tour's science. Okay, his chemistry. He's going to show it right there. And you know what? I'm going to learn something. And maybe Tour is a little weak in some area. So Tour might learn something, because David's saying he's reading all this stuff and Tour's saying they're reading it. But what we got was exactly what you said, which is Dave showed up to, crush. What was the word you used? To
discredit.
Humiliate. To discredit him. But to discredit him as an individual, not to discredit his chemistry, not to discredit his ideas, unless he could discredit the ideas by virtue of discrediting the man. And that was entirely unfortunate. And that brings us back, kind of, if you will, to the very, very beginning, which I said is, since none of us are organic chemists and biological, biological chemists and so on and so forth, we're not in that group, then we're left as laymen trying to figure out who we can trust based on what they're presenting us. And they just did a horrible job at presenting anything, even to somebody like me, who was looking forward for him to be presenting his best argument. I watched another review, and I mentioned the guy's name earlier, Paul Rimmer. He had a couple of critiques in there on Dave Tour. And Paul Rimmer likes Dave Tour. And he had a couple of critiques in there. And I thought, that's not a bad point. It was well presented. It was thoughtful. It was on the science and not on the man. And I'm sure that Dr. Tour would have taken that respectfully as well.
Yeah, it would have been really nice to see more going into the science. I should name this YouTuber I'm referencing. It was Base Theology as his YouTube channel. I think his name is... That. Sorry?
Yeah, I watched that one as well. I think you sent it to me as a link.
I was trying to find his name. He's the one who brought up the amino acids thing. And I commented on his video saying, I find it very interesting that you didn't quote any of David Farina's arguments from the debate. He got defensive. I just thought I'd make a simple matter of fact comment rather than investing too much, but we had a back and forth and I explained. He's like, no, well, yeah, I wanted to add something. So that's why I didn't quote David Farina. It's like, you can add something while highlighting a good argument made by someone during the debate. And if I'm 100% sure that if Farina had made a good argument related to what you were discussing in your video, you would have shown it and said, yeah, David already addressed this. Here, plays clip. Or when he said this, and just repeat it a little bit. But I can add more and then go into your video. So I think if you really picked apart the actual science discussed, I don't know if Farina added much of substance at all.
There was a few moments ago you were talking about the complexities that are involved in creating, amino acids, and should we, do we have like 10 or can we do 20 or the 40 or the whatever? So there's an awful lot of complexity that goes into that. And do we have time for me to kind of show a quick video?
Yeah, sure.
So in regards to all these amino acids, and you're going to get this and you're going to get that, just for a second, this is an animation, because of course we can't see it this deep down. This is a true to life animation about how two chromosomes are splitting inside of a cell. Now, granted, this is not abiogenesis. I'm not saying that this is before we have life. Now we have a life. It's just a basic cell. But I want you to take a look at the complexity that's going on inside this cell. Look, everything that you see moving is a separate machine, an organic machine. Forget about the fact that it's all programmed to be doing what it's doing. But just look at how it's working so interactively together. This is the complexity that we're trying to get a few amino acids and a couple of polypeptides, and maybe some catalysts, maybe some not. This is the complexity that we're talking about.
While the chromosome is still getting ready, the kinetochore sends out a chemical stop signal to the rest of the cell, shown here by the red molecules, basically saying this chromosome is not yet ready to divide. The kinetochore also mechanically senses tension. When the tension is just right and the position and attachment are correct, all the proteins get ready, shown here by turning green. At this point, the stop signal broadcasting system is not switched off. Instead, it is literally carried away from the kinetochore down the microtubules by a dynein motor. That's the walking guy. This is really what it looks like. It has long legs so it can avoid obstacles and step over the kinesins, molecular motors that walk in the opposite direction.
So that's the level of complexity that we're talking. All of those little things have to be built, and sometimes there's many, many pieces to them, So it's not just, can we come up with an amino acid? I mean, this is the complexity that we're talking about in life, and it's all well and good. I'm sure that one day we'll be able to make it. Dr. Tour has actually made some of those micromolecules. He's made little cars that drive around, that are molecule size. So that can be done. But I'm just saying that information has to come from somewhere. And Dave is not giving me the information that makes me feel like he's on a pathway, or the area of study is on a pathway to get us to that point.
So I think what Dave's argument here is that we don't need to show any of that. That's what happens when you already have life. We just need to show how things got started, and we've done that with autocatalytic molecules. And you just add a bunch of magical time to the equation, and surely life would come trumpeting out of it.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's asinine. Okay.
I think that's what he's saying.
I think that he kind of is saying that. But you look at, there's just no way that we can just look at the parts and say the parts are eventually going to give us what we just saw in the video. I'm agreeing. We're talking about the pieces that come before that. But that is some complex information that you just saw being worked on. And I'm not really even trying to get into the theology of how that information came to be. There was a discussion in the debate about the difference between Shannon information and specified information. So you're seeing specified information on display in that video. All I'm saying is you got to get those little parts. You got to get the little legs to match up with the body for the little walking man. Okay. And we're just not seeing that kind of stuff. When we do see it, it's at too low a yield, as I understand it. And again, not to be a scientist here, because I'm not, but I understand it's at too low of a yield, and it's not structured properly so that it will actually build upon itself and not destroy itself in the process. So that's about as deep as I want to go on chemistry.
I just want to play another quick clip quickly, which I think is relevant.
Where will you concede that this is a perfectly viable explanation for biologically relevant polysaccharides? Enzymes did it, just like they do today. Can you wrap your head around that, James?
Give me a minute to wrap my head around it.
Give you a minute to
please.
know what enzymes are and what they do?
Just give me.
If enzymes exist, can we get biologically relevant polysaccharides? Yes or no?
Here is the enzyme
the answer is
that
yes.
do this. This is the enzyme that does this. It is 98 kilodaltons. It's 20 to the 842. Mm-hmm. That's 10 to the 1094 possible scenarios. If you have anything more,
is that the enzyme that does this today,
to the
or
50th,
is that the enzyme
you don't
that
have
did this
enough
4
time
million
in
years
our
ago?
universe. In 14 billion years.
Wow, big numbers, guys.
Yeah, big numbers. So this is the type of enzyme that you would have to have.
So I just wanted to play that. I'm sure there's lots more that's interesting, but that big numbers thing is like, Yeah, we need to talk about the numbers. If there's something which is mathematically improbable, and we don't have enough time in the universe, then the theory is not plausible. So to just respond to a big number with, oh, big numbers, guys, big numbers, it's like, that's not an argument. I don't know how anyone could be convinced by that. Maybe they're not. Like, as you mentioned, some of the people on Reddit were disappointed with Dave's performance in the debate and that kind of thing. It's like, anyone who's paying attention knows that's not an argument.
So if we go back to the beginning of the debate, I think the question about whether or not, are we clueless about the origin of life? Okay. So if we can't answer that, if you and I and many of the viewers can't answer that because we don't have the scientific chops, okay, in order to be able to determine who's got the science better, Professor Dave, Professor Dave, okay, or Dr. James Tour, we've got a competing issue. And we have no other choice but to have to rely on an authority figure, then there are ways for us to do that. However, that was not that. While that was the prompt for the debate, I think that both of those two men came with goals that they wanted to achieve, and Dave was both of them were very clear about it. Dave's goal was to prove that Tor was a charlatan, does not know how to read the chemistry, hasn't read any origin of life papers, okay, doesn't know what he's talking about. And because of that, because he's a super Jesus guy, even if he does understand all of that stuff, he can't, his brain is not allowing him to process it in an unbiased fashion. Is that, would you agree, Arjuna? Is that fairly good about what Dave said that he was there to do?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Okay, I mean, you know, just speaking about it. And then what was it that Dr. Tour said that he was there to do? He said he was there because he's not trying to speak to his peers and the other researchers that are out there, those that are doing origin of life studies, not even those that are doing chemistry. He's out there because he's trying to communicate to the masses about whether or not they're being given, about whether or not the information they're being provided from the scientific community through the scientific media is being accurately portrayed to them. Would you maybe agree that that's pretty fair about?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what James has been trying to do for the last 2 years, is basically what the scientific literature actually establishes and what the lay people believe. There's a gulf of difference between those two things, and James is trying to clear that up. And when he's discussed with actual scientists in these fields, they've agreed with him by and large. Are you aware of any exceptions to that?
I'll think about that, but I want to come back to that in a second. Okay, but I think that's a clear point that you just made. So just to close out the who won the debate, if you will, since we can't say who the winner is based on are we clueless or not, because we can't read the science. Then we've got their two individual goals for the debate. And I'm sorry, whether I'm biased or not, maybe I can't see through my Jesus blinders, okay? But I don't think that Dave convinced me that Dr. James Tour is an ignoramus in the area of synthetic organic chemistry, which is exactly what you would be an expert in if you were doing origin of life studies, okay? So he failed on that part for me. Did Tour give me indications to believe that what's being presented to me in the scientific literature and the scientific media, okay, is not necessarily what is the truth? Then I have to say, I think that he has. I think that he's made his point, okay? I might have been a quasi-believer at the beginning anyway, you know, based on my introduction, but nonetheless, he certainly made his point to some degree or another. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things that's funny is how it's Dave Farina. You know, he's not a scientist in this field. He's not publishing in this field. Of course, people want to say that about James Tour because he does organic chemistry, not organic or origin of life research. But I think origin of life research is one of those disciplines that crosses over with many other disciplines. So you can't really just say someone is or isn't an expert in that field just because they happen to work in a related field. But it's interesting that there's not a scientist that actually works in this field directly debating James Tour, because I think nobody is prepared to defend the position Dave's defending other than Dave, because they all know it's untenable. That
actually, there are some short snippets. There is, and I don't know which. You could probably do a YouTube search for Dave Farina and Lee Cronin. They had a discussion. It wasn't a debate per se, but it was a discussion. But before we leave that, I'm going to want to show another video about just the point that you're making. What do the origin of life researchers actually say? So Lee Cronin has been referenced many times in this original. If you look up the original one, which we're not going to look at, but if you look up the original one, Lee Cronin was hooking and jabbing pretty good with Dr. Tour, okay, over these discussions. Nonetheless, Dr. Cronin, Professor Lee Cronin, made a statement about a decade ago. He made a statement about a decade ago where he said that I'm going to create life in my lab in the next 2 years. Well, clearly we're far, far beyond that. And I think that's illustrative of what Dr. Tour is saying, is that every time we find something that gets us a little bit closer to understanding how we go from, dead dirt, okay, into, from chemicals into life, we learn that just when we take that next step, we learn that we've just taken a step closer, but now we're 100 more miles further away than we thought we were in the first place. So in the debate, there was a comment where Dr. Tour says, hey, even Lee Cronin says that origin of life research is a scam. And that caught Professor Dave on caught him sideways, upside the head. And when he did that, he goes, well, first off, he was disputing that he even said that. And then Dr. Tour showed the receipts. He showed a tweet that Dr. Cronin had sent out saying essentially that origin of life research is a scam. And
I can play that clip. Actually, I just found it. Should I play it?
Are you pulling up the YouTube video?
I've got the clip from the debate where James Tour quotes Lee Cronin.
Sure, let's see that, and then let's look at what was actually said on Lex Cronin's podcast.
My opponent's favorite origin of life expert, Professor Lee Cronin, now writes and says on multiple occasions that, quote, origin of life research is a scam, unquote, and, quote, there are lots of layers to the scam, unquote. A scam means a dishonest scheme or a fraud. It's beautiful. It's as if Professor Lee Cronin has been scientifically born again. Mr. Farina, I respect your courage to be here tonight. It's too bad that
I'm not sure where he goes from there. I just pulled up that one bit.
Oh, that's okay. That was very good. There was a little bit more of an exchange after that, which we don't have to go into. But Dave disputes that he meant that. Then he said, oh, he was just joking around. And then he pulled up the tweet or something. So let's look at what Professor Lee Cronin actually said. If you'll go to,
is it on Unbelievable?
It says, huh?
Is that James Tour and Lee Cronin on Unbelievable?
Yes, that's where that one is. We're not going to look at that though.
Okay, sorry.
On the notes page, it says this is the Lex Friedman interview of Lee Cronin.
Got it. Yeah.
And then you'll see the YouTube thing, and we're going to just do a seconds 3 to 7 as the intro, and then we're going to skip ahead to 3:18 where he talks about it in more detail.
You've tweeted that, quote, origin of life research is a scam. So if this is Shakespeare, can we analyze this word? Why is the origin of life research a scam? Aren't you kind of doing origin of life research?
Stop that.
Okay, it was tongue.
And then we're going to go to 3:18, and we'll end at 4:39.
But coming back to the scam is if we just make this RNA, we've got this, this fluke event. We know how that's simple. Let's make this phosphodiester, or let's make ATP or ADP. We've got that part nailed. Let's now make this other molecule, another molecule. And how many molecules are going to be enough? And then the reason I say this is when you go back to Craig Venter, when he invented his life form, Cynthia, this minimal plasmid, is a myoplasma, something, I don't know the name of it, but he made this wonderful cell and said, I've invented life. Not quite. He facsimiled the genome
from this entity and made it in the lab, all the DNA, but he didn't make the cell. He had to take an existing cell that has a causal chain going all the way back to Luca, and he showed when he took out the genes and put in his genes, synthesized, the cell could boot up. But it's remarkable that he could not make a cell from scratch. And even now, today, synthetic biologists cannot make a cell from scratch because there's some contingent information embodied outside the genome in the cell. And that is just incredible. So there's lots of layers to the scam.
What do you think of that, Arjuna?
Sounds like he's standing beside his statement, standing behind it.
That it was a scam?
Yeah. He just gave an explanation and then repeated his statement.
Yeah. And I think that if you go back and you listen to the opening, the introduction by Dave Torr in the debate, you're going to hear Dr. Torr say almost exactly the same thing. Almost exactly. In fact, of those 5 things that Dr. Torr listed on the blackboard behind him, the only thing that Lee Cronin didn't mention, I think, was the very first one. Okay. So Lee Cronin is saying that these other 4 things, we ain't doing it. And not only are we not doing it, we're not sure that we're on the right path to be doing it. We don't even know what questions we should be asking to get to those parts.
I saw a comment on Facebook. Someone was saying what would have been way more helpful is to watch the kind of thing we see academics normally do when they're debating an issue, which is it's a scientist, it could be philosophy, it could be a scientific subject. They'll study the literature, they'll do some research themselves, they'll compile the results of that, and they'll look at all the research that contradicts it, they'll look at the people arguing against the conclusion, they'll put all that together, and then they give a lecture, and the lecture is often submitted as a paper, which also gets published in a journal. They'll present their lecture, including, just accurately representing the science, accurately representing their opponents, giving their responses, and somebody else from the other side will do the same thing, and we listen to both sides give their lecture, and we can think about it. Or the scientists can listen to both sides and think about it. And that's what we need to see happening. But the reason why we're having this instead of that is because the scientific establishment and the scientists involved refuse to debate these issues. Richard Dawkins is not debating William Lane Craig. Well, he won't. The scientist from debate would be Stephen Meyer or someone else from Discovery Institute. He's refusing to have that debate. And even that would be like a highly publicized debate, something like this, although probably a little bit more civil. But, for the academic institutions to do with published research papers or published meta-analyses. But that's not happening. It's basically like a religion. I had a philosopher on my channel recently. I haven't published that discussion yet with Michael Humer, and he was saying, because I mentioned how philosophy seems to be the last stronghold of rationality in institutions, where anyone can publish a philosophy paper as long as you can write to the standard that's required. If you write a quality paper, it doesn't William Lane Craig could write a philosophy paper, or any philosopher could write a philosophy paper, put somebody else's name on it, submit it for publication, and if it's of sufficient quality, it would get published because there's this rationality there. But one thing is for philosophy, there's no relying on expertise, either the logic's there or the logic's not. For other subjects, you kind of need to know that. So you need to have scientific credentials if you're going to publish a paper on heart surgery or research or whatnot. So basically this isn't happening, unfortunately, because they refuse to debate these issues.
And so why
because it's contentious. That's what I was going to quote for the podcast. This philosopher, I mentioned how this is the last stronghold of rationality, and he said, and then I compared it to other things. He said, for contentious things, if it's uncontentious, then there's rationality in institutions. As soon as it's contentious, all the rationality goes away.
Yeah, I remember when I was younger, okay, probably younger than you are now, that the inverse was kind of true. There'd be very heated debates over issues that were philosophical in nature, okay? And sometimes they would devolve away from rationality themselves. Depending on how the people that were involved kind of thing. But the science seemed to be very straightforward. It either is 2 + 2 is either 4 or it's not. Okay. And here's the math. And I think that is, so let's go in maybe a couple of the strongest arguments that each side had, and maybe a little bit of elucidation on that. I would like to point out that I think that one of Dave's arguments, and one that I see from many of people that are on his side, if you will, is Dr. Tor is not a researcher in origin of life research. Okay? Hence, his opinions are worthless. Is that fair?
Yeah, you do hear that one, yeah.
Okay. Yet, Dave Farina is not a researcher in origins of life research. He doesn't even have a doctorate in any of the fields that would get you there. In fact, he doesn't even have a master's degree in any of the fields that would kind of get you there. Nor do any of the people that I know that, asked him questions at the debate or have been involved with him, with very limited exceptions, none of them are also working in origins of life research. Most of the people that were in the audience, to include me, maybe you, we don't have backgrounds into that. So my point on that is you can't say Tor's not working in that area and his information is invalid, and then have Dave Tor show up and he's not working in that area. But boy, you should listen to him because he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
That's just so totally invalid. The other thing that I heard a lot of is that, hey, Tor can go out there and he can engage with the scientists that are out there, and maybe he could write some papers and whatnot and get them published, in arguing against the origin of life research that's out there. And as we mentioned earlier, that is not what Tor is trying to do. Tor doesn't need to tell people working in origin of life. Tor has communicated to me, in his lectures and whatnot, that he's not desirous to get out there and teach origin of life researchers where they're going wrong, because he has a sneaking suspicion they know where they're going wrong. They don't need to be told that from some guy.
Yeah, they already know. That's why they're not up here debating him.
That's right. So he does want to talk to the people that are like us. But that having been said, if he wanted to publish an origin of life research paper to rebut some of the stuff that's out there, he's mentioned it. He's got to go through peer review. Okay. And the first thing he's got to do before he even gets to peer review is it's got to be accepted for peer review at the journal. And in 1998, they did a survey of the scientists that were members of the National Academy of Science, and 96% of those guys rejected theology of any type. 96% of them were just not agnostic, or just that's Jesus stuff. It's craziness. We're not into that. They rejected it outright. So that's the flow that he's trying to get over if he wants to publish anything. 96% of the people that are theoretically, about that amount, okay, are going to be already against him from the very beginning. And then I sent you a link if you just wanted to pull it up as I'm kind of talking, and I think it's towards the end. It says something like, it's just a, let's see.
Where you find that, I just wanted to quickly add that the word I was looking for was politicized. It's not contentious. Political subjects are where academic institutions lose their ability to be rational. And what you were saying about philosophy, how back in the day the science was clear, but the philosophy was where the questions were. Even today, there's huge disagreement among philosophers, but they're civil about it.
Yes.
They'll actually engage with each other's arguments.
And so we don't need to scroll through all of this, but you can certainly look it up, because in homage to Dave Farina, okay, is by just showing the paper, and I'll tell you what's in it. But this paper says that if you want to submit things for peer review, the journals want to turn you down right away if you don't have something positive to say. Well, Tor is not offering a positive argument. He's offering a negative argument, such as this 2 + 2 = 5 thing that you're telling us. He says that ain't true. That's a negative argument. And so this is a survey article that is published, actually, that says that peer-reviewed publications do not want to publish that kind of stuff. So not only do we have Tor submitting information that is counter to the ideological bent of the people who are going to approve it, but even if that was the case, he's sending in something that is saying 2 + 2 is not 5. And right here it says, we don't want to publish that kind of stuff. We want to see the new stuff, new ideas, not debunking old ideas.
Right.
So what is Tor to do to get his If he wanted to, he's fighting a major uphill battle, with massive headwinds at the same time. I'm just not sure what kind of headway he could make, even if he wanted to.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I've heard that point made too about the climate change stuff, because like with a lot of papers to get something published, like they do their research and they do, 20 experiments, and one of them has something interesting. So they publish that one interesting experiment. But because we're getting a filtered sample of what's getting published, it's filtering for probabilities that might not actually be representative of the real landscape out there. So then they get these interesting results that other people can't repeat, but no one's incentivized to repeat studies or to re-review already published literature. You don't get paid for that. And so that kind of stuff doesn't get published. So somebody manages to, through filtering data, get some sensationalized study that they can publish, which is just filtered results. And then that's not reproducible, but we never find that out because the studies don't go back and get re-examined.
Mm-hmm. So it's my understanding, again, as a non-scientist, that the entire nature of science is to question everything. Question everything, question it all the time, and then question it again, okay? And so for an hour and a half, we watched, and many hours of, of video, YouTube's back and forth, okay? Dave Farina is sitting there and just taking the fire hose right down his throat. He's not questioning anything. The only thing he's questioning is the theological bent of a scientist who's telling him not to accept the science blindly. And Dave Tour, on the other hand, has picked one little area, one very small area in science, and he said, question that. And he goes, you might question other things too, okay? But don't accept it at face value. But that I've questioned, and you're not answering my questions. So I think the true scientist in the debate was pretty obvious. If the nature of science is to question everything and question everything always.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There was one point in the debate where Tour was asking, show me a paper for that, or show me in the paper where it says that. And Dave said, look, if you were really honest, you would go onto Google, search these papers up and read them for yourself, and then you'd find it. You wouldn't have to get me to give them to you. It's like, no, dude, you're the one defending a proposition. If you've got a paper that like James Tour has already looked at the literature for himself and not seen it. So don't tell him to go do his homework. He's already done that. If you want to say it's in there, pull it up and show it to him. And if you can't do that, then chill out with all this hubris.
Yeah, in the Dave Tour Dave Farina and James Tour, there was an email back and forth over a couple of months during the period that James Tour's father died, but back and forth via email on discussing how to do this debate. And James Tour actually asked, let's pick 10 papers, whatever 10 papers you want to use for you is perfectly fine. He goes, give us 10 papers and let's just focus on those 10 papers. And Dave Farina said, he goes, no, he goes, any of the papers that I've ever shown in any of my videos that are addressing this, we have to have available. And it went on poorly for a while. And Dave was threatening to pull out if, in fact, he didn't get to have all of his papers, which was about 50. And so Dave Tour said, fine. He goes, let's do the debate. We'll do your 50. And he goes, if you need a couple, Tour even said, if you need a couple more, it's okay. But you got to give them to me at least 30 days out. Because Dr. Tour doesn't just read the paper. This is according to Dr. Tour. Dr. Tour doesn't just read the paper and he's good. He'll read the paper. He'll find the references and the source material in there. And he'll go back and he'll read that until he's got an understanding of it. So he said, you can't give me papers, a couple of days out. And he goes, I don't have time for that because I got a full-time job. And so Dave agreed that he wouldn't do that he wouldn't bring anything else other than the papers that were already defined. But it was already 50 papers, which is far too many for this type of a debate. If they'd have brought just one and just drilled down on the one, I think we'd have gotten a much better debate. But that wasn't an option. And nonetheless, when Dave showed up, if you remember in the debate, there was a point where Tour says, hey, you can't use that. You didn't send me that paper. That's a new paper. We agreed not to use new papers. And so Dave not only introduced a new paper, but he didn't even bring all of it. He brought the title page and the abstract. And when he was pressed on it, and he said, well, what's the data on that? He goes, I don't have that data. I don't remember what it was. But he was introducing additional papers even during the debate. Just an additional insight onto his character.
That's pretty nuts. Yeah. I mean, but then like every time Tua questioned him on it, he was like, oh, it's in the paper. It's like, well, show me it's in the paper. It would be like, I don't have to. It's in the paper. Just look at it. Or somehow they would deflect, and there was never actually a drilling down into any of the issues. So like, you know, let's say hypothetically there were 5 things where James Tua really cornered him. Maybe there were 15 or 20, but what the number isn't relevant. Not a single one of those cases was ever actually explored in any detail. It was just a, yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it's not. And then it was like, okay, we're out of time. Next section. Just really disappointing.
Okay, so earlier we were talking a little bit in regards to, how Dave presents information and says it's in the paper. Okay, therefore I'm done. And this is just a screenshot that I took off of one of the videos. You can kind of see it there at the bottom, I believe. But one of the videos for that Dr. Tour put out. In the upper right-hand column there, you'll see all that information. And I'm not going to get into it, obviously. But if you went to his YouTube channel, he spends several minutes on just this page, reading it to you and talking to you about what his critiques are about it and how it applies back. And he's highlighted the other thing, where you see MgCl, whatever the heck, magnesium chloride. Hey, look how much I'm learning just watching Dr. Tour. Okay, and 17% yield and stuff like that. So he'll spend several minutes on this, okay? And then what is it that we get from Dave Farina? 607, and we're only going to do 20 seconds of it. We're going to end at 27.
Antio-pure products that will yield ribonucleotides. Beyond all of this, there is even research, such as with this paper, offering a model that suggests homochirality may have emerged at the polymer level rather than with monomers, as is shown here with RNA. Either way, once again, RNA molecules are known to...
So in that less than 20-second clip, what we saw is Dave Farina showing 3 papers, and also showing, forget the last thing, okay, just a PowerPoint slide, okay? But in 20 seconds, Dave Farina is showing 3 papers, and he's telling us that this proves what he's saying. He's not getting into it. He's not showing us what it's saying. He's just saying, here's 3 papers, and now I'm telling you what they mean. And we're supposed to accept that kind of stuff. Yet on Dave Tour's channel, you go there, and you'll spend several minutes on a single page of paper as Dr. Tour is going, and A, and that leads to B, and A and B together is AB, and you add this to C, and you subtract out hydrogen, and blah, blah, blah. So I'm not saying that because Tour does that, he's right, and because Dave doesn't do that, he's wrong. What I am saying is that if that's the level of expertise that I've got to assign a level of expertise to one that I'm not assigning to the other. And one is making points to me, scoring points, okay? And the other one is losing points. And that is the debate in a nutshell.
Yeah, well put. So we probably can go for like another 20 minutes or so. Do you want to get through any more of your material? I've probably taken you off course lots from all your notes.
Oh, that's okay. Let's see. You know what? I think that I might be able to make an additional character point to follow up where we were just at. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And are you okay with we'd have to find it, but
yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so this will be a minute or so, okay? Because he's gonna welcome him and then give him a gift, and then he's gonna do a bit of a welcoming introduction, right? So I think if we come back to the original discussion that you and I were having at the top, the issue is if we can't understand the technical details of the experts and what they're telling us, how do we decide what we're hearing is true? They're either both wrong or one is right and one is wrong. And if we can't do the chemistry ourselves, if we can't understand the math behind it, sometimes even can't understand the concepts, then it's a fallacy, right? An argument from authority, but that's all we've got left. So how are we going to put these 2 authority figures together to figure it out? And I've got to say that it was going to boil down to character. There's no other way that I can see that. And so,
fair enough. Yeah.
I mean, what else do I have to go on? I can just dismiss them both out of hand and be done with them. But if I'm really looking for truth, if I'm looking for any nugget of truth that I can find in this situation, I've got to default away from the science because I can't do the science. But what I can do is I can make a judgment on the man. Okay. And so let's take a few seconds and look at the introduction here from Dr. James Tour.
Before we get started, I want to do something. Got a gift for Mr. Farina. Now, I was thinking, what could I get such an amazing person? And I've got you something that I am sure you do not have. This is something called laser-induced graphene. It was a process we developed in 2013 where a laser can hit any surface that's made out of carbon, and in this case, it's paper. And the laser can write a pattern. So what you're going to look at is paper that has been converted into carbon. The carbohydrates have been converted into graphene through the laser action. And so here's what we've got for you. Oh, that's very lovely. It's a nice gesture. Thank you. Is this on? Check these.
Thanks very much, James.
I don't remember exactly, so we're not going to do it. But if we'll go forward to Dave Farina's opening statement, and I'll have a comment before that, 1810. Okay, so what we just saw is Dr. Tour. The guy is involved in so many companies, and he does so much of this graphene stuff, which I don't understand, but it looks fantastically profitable, okay? I imagine the guy is quite wealthy from all this stuff. This is something that he kind of developed with his line of work. Anyways, so if you didn't notice on the gift that was given, it was a photograph from Professor Dave, the one that he uses as part of his marketing thing on his YouTube channel. And then, of course, welcomed him to come in. That was all well and good. So just being a nice guy with him. And then he heads off into doing his introduction, which we're going to skip that part. But now with all of this, all of this show of goodwill on the part of Dr. Tour, let's watch just maybe the first 30 seconds or so of the introduction from Dave Farina.
Hey everyone, thanks to Rice University for having us here tonight. We are here because of James Tour. James is a chemist and also an apologist who lies about origin of life research on the internet. It's quite the double life. In order to understand why he does this, we turn to his faith. James has admitted publicly that he is a creationist. He believes that God created life due to religious scripture, which to him takes priority over scientific evidence. From his website, faith and belief go beyond scientific evidence for this scientist. Anyone who thinks this is not relevant to the discussion is delusional, as James is openly admitting that there's no science that could ever be done that will convince him that life was not directly created by God. He is ideologically bound to denying abiogenesis. He sometimes pretends to leave room for it, as he did just now, to seem open-minded, but he isn't. He's totally dogmatic. Therefore, his opinions on origin of life research are irrelevant, as he is approaching the field not as a scientist, but as
let's go ahead and stop that.
That's incredible, eh?
Okay, I'm just saying, Arjuna, for context, right? When they started having this little tit and tat back and forth, Dr. Tour reached out and magnanimously said, hey, let's get together. I can get us a big room. We can either just have a discussion, okay? Or we can invite in some people to listen, or hey, we can record it and do, something for our YouTube channels. He goes, let's just have a discussion. And he goes, listen, I know you're believing what you're reading, and and I believe what I'm reading and saying and so on and forth. So let's get together and have this discussion. And he said, Dr. Tour said, I will fly you in to Houston. I will make and he did, and I will make the arrangements so that we have a venue, of whatever kind of venue you want. And he goes, you know what? I'll pay for your lodging. And by the way, I would prefer, you're welcome. I'm making my home open for you. Instead of staying in a hotel, you're welcome to stay at my home with me and with my family. And we'll make sure that we have a meal together, a dinner meal or something like that, right? And then, of course, we go further in it, and this starts coming up, and what Dave accepted or didn't accept, I don't know. But then Dr. Tour says, I'm going to go ahead and video this for my, for my YouTube channel. And he goes, and I'm going to make it available to you if you want it as well. And Dave says, well, go ahead. That's perfectly fine. He goes, but I don't know if he said, if he raised an issue of cost, about how much it would cost, and the coordinating. And Dr. Tour says, don't worry about that. He goes, I'll cover it. I'll get the right people in. We'll have the multiple cameras and the mics and everything like that. And he goes, and I'll give you a copy of it for your YouTube channel, and you don't have to worry about paying for it. Okay? I cannot imagine the graciousness of that man, be he right or wrong on the chemistry, to have bent over backwards to do all of this. And in less than 30 seconds, he's called a liar and a fraud and incompetent. Okay. And this is just the first couple of sentences of the introduction.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. So I find it crazy because they're saying this is an ad hominem. And right there in that clip we just played, he said his opinions are irrelevant, basically, because he's a theist. And it's like, well, William Lane Craig has been dragged over the coals for similar statements, for saying, the reason I believe this stuff is because of my personal experiences of it. And then when I'm trying to convince other people of the faith, I give philosophical argumentations. But these philosophical arguments aren't actually the reasons why I believe. I believe because I had personal experiences of Jesus touching me. And I don't see why that's a big deal. I mean, even when they do neuroscience or psychology and study how people actually reason, they find that the story we tell ourselves and tell other people of why we did something a certain way or why we believe a certain thing, it's a completely different brain structure. So basically trying to persuade other people of something and the reason why I believe something are basically always at the deepest psychological level, different things. So, and then more relevant to what he's saying here, it's like, you can say, okay, here's your premises you believe. You're all into the science stuff. Let's discuss the science. I have my personal faith. I'm not trying to convince you of that. I just see issues with what's presented here, and I'm going to give arguments within that realm. And then you're the one trying to bring in my faith realm here. That's totally off topic. So to me, what Dave Farina did in his opening statement just there is an incredible degree of intellectual dishonesty, which is basically the polite way of calling somebody someone who hits below the belt in an intellectual context. I've got another clip we can play. Well, there's another clip I can play which displays James Tour's magnanimity, but I want to play this clip first, which is from a podcast Dave Farina did as a debate review.
One thing that I got a question from a lot of audience members during the debate at the very, very beginning, the gift that he gave you. Mm-hmm. Do you have that? You know, because we saw it was like your image was on it, but was that all it was, or?
It was like, yeah, my logo and my channel name.
Oh, okay. So it was just kind of like
yes, yeah.
Oh, neat, very cool. Because a lot of people thought it might have said something on it, like it might have been like a message of wisdom or something.
Screw you, you jerk. No, it was a gift meant to this is like, hey, look at what a nice guy I am, right? Look at what a nice, sweet, good Christian I am. David, you don't know what you're talking.
So, I just find that incredible. It's like, I mean, I know lots of atheists who argue against theism who have upstanding character. I had my most recently published videos with Ben Watkins. He's really fun to talk to, really honest about the arguments, and so I don't want to cast a light that they're all like this, but I just find that incredible that it is a trend you see, probably let's say on both sides, of misrepresenting the other side. Maybe we just have a bias, so we see it more from the atheists because that's who we come up against. But that kind of, I just have no patience for that kind of thing. If somebody's saying, acting in a nice way, it's like, why not just accept it on surface level? Why attribute all these ill motives under the surface? I think to attribute ill motives under the surface, you need to have evidence for that, and that's not there. And you might want to have some comments, but I want to pull it. I'll find a clip so you can make any comments. Of someone asked, "Can you say something nice about your interlocutor?" And James pulled it off. David didn't.
Yeah. I think we might be able to close this out at 1:35:52. This is a Q&A when they were asked, what did they admire about each?
Yeah, that's what I'm pulling up. Yeah. Okay, you've got the timestamp. 1:35.
About 52 or so.
that they admire about each other's scientific career.
Okay, let me start. Let me start. This man has said multiple times that I have called him stupid. I have never called him stupid because I don't think he's stupid. I have said he's clueless on this topic. I have said he cannot read the scientific literature. That doesn't mean stupid. This man has become a musician, and then he went out, and in 2015, he started an educational site, which is huge. Stupid people can't do that. I admire him. This is an educational site, and I have never called him stupid because he's not stupid. He's not stupid. So I admire him for his educational site. And from what I understand, I'm not a musician. From what I understand, what people have said, he's an excellent musician. I admire him for that as well. His wife is here. He's a father. He has 2 children. I admire that a man can have a wife and 2 children and stay married and do these things these days. That is wonderful. That is wonderful. I admire that.
So I think what James did just there is pretty impressive, because you have a heated exchange with someone, it could be hard to say nice things about him. And I think he was pretty genuine. He came off the cuff and just rolled all that out. I think that's pretty impressive. And then Dave just insults him.
Yeah, well, let's hear that.
The tenacity with which you stick to a script of lies, it's actually quite impressive. I never said Dave was stupid. I just said his content is a manure dump. I just said everything he says is wrong. I said he's clueless. I said he doesn't know chemistry. Although, again, who's used my content to pass his class? Anybody here? That's what I thought, James. He doesn't know chemistry, yet I'm helping your students. Isn't that interesting?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Would you like to retract any of these statements?
That
or
you're
perhaps all of
clueless
them?
on origin of life? No. Does Farina know chemistry? No.
I don't know
like
chemistry.
You have
I
a
don't
script.
know chemistry.
Anybody
Yet I
can
have a
read
very
a script. You saw it
Okay,
tonight.
keeps going on, but yeah, it's pretty incredible. Actually, maybe just quickly on that point about him. When I first heard that criticism of having a script, I thought, I don't understand the criticism. You prepare for a debate, you have your notes, you follow your notes. But I think what he's saying is James knows the stuff inside out. He can go ad lib. He doesn't need the prompts in front of him. He just knows the science. Whereas David just has to pull up quotes, and that's the only way he can be like, oh yeah, there's a study. Let me find the study. Yeah, look, the title of the paper.
I think that what he was referring to, and I haven't independently verified this myself. I just have not been so inclined. But I think what he's saying is that, if you look at Dave Farina's videos, right? It's Dave Farina is not on camera a whole lot. Okay, he's showing these different papers and these slides and things of this nature, but he's narrating from the background. Well, it's more likely than not that he's narrating from a script. So he has these things prepared, fine, and he's reading from them. And I think what Dr. Tour is saying is that he just took some of the scripts that he had and he brought it here, from his show, and he's just repeating it as part of the debate. I think that's what he's saying.
Right. Okay. So we should probably wrap it up soon. Is there any pertinent things we missed from your notes? I don't know what percentage of your notes we actually covered.
I think a good bit of it. So it's very nice of you to invite me on. I'm a nobody, but since I'm the nobody that Dr. Tour is trying to talk to, and I paid a lot of attention to this debate, and I'll be honest with you, I used to follow Professor Dave too, but when I asked him a couple of questions on one of his YouTube videos, he shadow banned me, so I don't follow him anymore because it's just, it was just bad character, so.
Okay. I don't think I'm shadow banned. I did have him reply to me in a comment section on YouTube. And
okay, so you should know this as a creator, right? But apparently when you shadow ban somebody, when you go back, like nobody said anything to me, nobody upvoted me, downvoted me, whatever. Okay, and I thought, damn, am I that like uninspiring? I couldn't get anybody to comment on my big question. And so 2 or 3 times that happened, I thought, what the heck? Every time I went back, I saw my lone comment floating there. So I had to log in with a different YouTube account, and I went to go look at my comment. It wasn't there.
Yeah, so that's the way to tell.
I still see the comments, but nobody else sees them. He banned me.
Yeah, that's how shadow banning works. You can't tell you've been banned, but nobody else can see your comments.
just bad juju, man. Very disappointing.
There's been some good memeing going around of some of the stuff Dave's been up to in comment sections. It's pretty incredible. I should bring some.
I think
anyway. Cameron
I
Bertuzzi
don't have him.
And Capturing Christianity has been exposing some good ones. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, I don't have it, but on Dr. Tour on the debate YouTube channel, I think the guy's name is Sam Burns. Okay, don't hold me to that, but there's a YouTube commenter on there named Sam Burns, and like everybody thinks it's Dave Farina. So everybody's like saying, "Hey, Sam, quit shadow banning me on your account or something like that." It's actually quite hilarious. Yes, I would like to say when. So you did a great job, Dr. Tour. I said, I know you got a little bit heated there a few times. I know that if you could go back and do it again, you probably wouldn't do it. But I will tell you that I do not think that I could have kept my cool the way that you kept your cool. And so to the degree that you're out there and you're furthering God's word by being an example to what he calls you for, I think you did a great job. Very proud of you. I couldn't have done it. I aspire to that. And then I will say prayers privately for Dave Farina to maybe find a little bit more peace in his life.
Okay, I found it where he replied to me in comments. I started watching one of his videos and then I just heard him hurling all these insults. It's like, I can't listen to this. And I commented, I can't take your argument seriously when it includes an ad hominem rejection of scientists, which James Shore quotes. If someone's religious leanings discredit their scientific acumen, then someone's atheistic leanings discredit their opinion of the theistic implications of science. And then Dave, the only thing I'm rejecting here is Tua's lies, kiddo. He anyway, he basically just defends himself. I don't know. Yeah, there's a bit of back and forth there. People can pause and read if they want to.
Wonder if it's still there.
Yeah, it's still there. I just pulled it up right now. I just went and found it.
No, remember, just because you can see it doesn't mean it's still there.
Oh, right. Well, the video, it's this video. Someone can go and check if they want to. Maybe someone. I can put the link in the description. Yeah, so I'll put links to our notes. Maybe, I don't know if we'll edit the notes for them to be like someone might want to look at, and we'll put links to all the videos we've played clips from. Probably not with timestamps, but if anyone wants to see the full picture of anything we've quoted, you can go watch the whole podcast and the whole videos. Don't take our word for it. Go see what these people said and hear it in context. And yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up there. Thanks for coming on. I guess as you mentioned, this is your first rodeo, but you speak well. You I don't know if you speak for a job at all, but you've clearly got some presentation skills.
Well, I'll take that.
Do you do presentations at all for work or anything? Do you do any public speaking?
I talk all the time at work, usually at very small groups.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess this would be similar because really it's just one-on-one.
Just you and me.
Yeah. It's funny, the YouTube sphere. Like I remember hearing Cosmic Skeptic Alex O'Connor say like he went and did some he did some live public speaking and then he went and did a YouTube video again. He's like, oh, it's nice to be like back in my familiar environment here in my room talking to my camera again. So it's a different sort of speaking skill. Like you could be like here with people you're familiar with doing a debate and it's like, oh wow, because we're live on Modern Day Debate, there's 350 people watching. And it's like, here's someone I've had on my channel a few times and it's like, yeah, you just kind of become comfortable with it.
You made this a very positive experience. I appreciate it for you for doing that. I also realized just from the little bit that I did, the behind the scenes work that goes into the production of it. So
you did all the work for me on this one.
My hat's off to you.
Yeah, it's tough finding time because I work full-time as an electrician. A year and a half ago, I started my own business, which has probably at least quartered my YouTube production because I just don't get that much time. And I have a family. Took the kids to soccer this morning, but doing 11 a.m. on Saturdays because we get back from soccer and there's a bit of time. So yeah, it's
Arjuna,
tough.
Is this a labor of love for you? Or
I love it. Yeah, it's a great hobby for me. I mean, I get philosophers on, like world-class philosophers. Like, I can't believe I get to talk to these people. This is incredible. And like, I've got things to say. I think about these subjects. You do it in comment section and you don't get so much reach, but you make a video and the reach is bigger. It's less people making videos compared to the amount of people making comments in comment sections.